While the US is slapping tariffs on African goods, China just did the opposite. 53 African nations, zero tariffs. One strategic move that could change the future of global trade and reshape who Africa sees as a true partner. At a major China-Africa cooperation summit, Chinese Foreign Minister and Chief Diplomat Wang Yi made a game-changing announcement. China is ready to completely eliminate tariffs on imports from every African country it has diplomatic relations with, excluding Eswatini, since it recognizes Taiwan. This isn't just a symbolic gesture. China is already Africa's biggest trading partner, and it has been for over 15 years. In 2023 alone, Africa exported more than $170 billion worth of goods to China. Everything from crude oil and cobalt to seafood, coffee, and cocoa. And in 2024, total trade between China and Africa surged to nearly $300 billion. That's a 5% jump from the previous year. But what's more important is this. African exports to China grew faster than Chinese exports to Africa. For once, the trade balance is tilting in Africa's favor. Now imagine for a second what zero tariffs could mean. Easier access to Chinese markets, higher profits for African producers, more jobs, faster industrial growth. This is the kind of deal Africa has never been offered by the West. Let's talk specifics. South Africa, for example, is already one of China's top trading partners on the continent. It's also the only permanent African member of BRICS, a powerful economic bloc that includes China, Brazil, India, and Russia. South Africa exports precious minerals like platinum and gold, as well as fruit, wine, and industrial machinery. In return, China supplies South Africa with electronics, heavy equipment, vehicles, and telecommunications infrastructure. It's a two-way street, not a one-sided relationship. South Africa's trade with China now dwarfs its trade with the United States or the European Union. Why? Because Beijing doesn't demand political obedience or attach harsh conditions. It doesn't tell African nations how to run their economies, their elections, or their foreign policies. That alone makes China a far more attractive partner. And then there's the Democratic Republic of Congo, or DRC, one of the richest countries in the world when it comes to natural resources. The DRC is a key global supplier of cobalt, which is essential for electric vehicle batteries and smartphones. Over 70% of the world's cobalt comes from this country, and China is by far the biggest buyer. Chinese companies have invested billions in the DRC, building roads, bridges, hospitals, and power plants, often in areas where Western governments and corporations never bothered to show up. In return, they get access to strategic minerals. It's not charity, it's business. But it's business that actually leaves something behind. Now compare that to the West's legacy in Africa. Centuries of colonialism, resource theft, and imposed aid packages designed to keep Africa dependent. Even today, Western governments tie their trade deals to so-called good governance clauses, forcing African nations to jump through hoops, accept foreign advisors, or privatize their economies just to qualify for basic market access. There's an air of superiority when Westerners mention Africa. They'd never outright say it, but you can sense it's there. Take the United States, for instance. In 2024, the U.S. imported just under $40 billion worth of goods from Africa, but most of that was under the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, or AGOA, a deal that allows tariff-free access to U.S. markets, but only if African nations meet Washington's political standards. The problem? The U.S. can cancel AGOA access at any time. And now, under Trump's return to power, African nations are facing higher tariffs, not lower. Tariffs of 30, 40, even 50% are on the table for countries like South Africa, Nigeria, and Lesotho. So while China is opening its markets and dropping barriers, America is closing doors and raising walls. A return to isolationism for the crumbling superpower. And the European Union isn't much better. African exports to Europe often face complex regulations, sanitary requirements, and quotas. Plus, the EU continues to flood African markets with cheap subsidized products from milk to poultry, undercutting local farmers and producers. Just take a look at how France still messes with its former African colonies. It's no wonder more and more African nations are turning east instead of west. But China's zero tariff plan isn't just about economics. It's also a strategic move. China knows its domestic economy is slowing, its population is aging, so it's looking outward to places like Africa, not just for raw materials, but for new markets, young labor, and fresh diplomatic partnerships. This isn't new. Through the Belt and Road Initiative, China has already built thousands of kilometers of railways, highways, and ports across Africa. Now, by removing tariffs, it's doubling down, offering African nations a path to prosperity without political strings. And unlike the West, China doesn't pretend to be Africa's savior. It treats African countries as equals, not as charity cases. That difference in attitude matters more than most people realize. Even so, African leaders are urging China to go further. South African President Cyril Ramaphosa and others have called on Beijing to import not just raw materials, but finished goods, textiles, processed foods, electronics, and manufactured products. They want China to help Africa industrialize, not just dig and export. And that's a fair request. Because if this tariff plan is implemented properly, it could kickstart a new wave of manufacturing and agro-processing across the continent. It could help African businesses move up the value chain, build factories, create skilled jobs, and integrate into global supply chains. But let's be honest, Africa has challenges. Many countries still lack the infrastructure, financing, and logistics to scale up production. Quality standards can be tough to meet. There's a long way to go. That's why this tariff-free access must be paired with serious investment in industrial parks, ports, training centers, and energy grids. China can play a central role here, and so far it's shown more willingness to invest in real infrastructure than any Western power. Countries like Ethiopia are already seeing the benefits. With Chinese support, Ethiopia built the continent's first electrified transnational railway from Addis Ababa to Djibouti, cutting transport times from days to hours. The country has also developed its first industrial zones, exporting garments and electronics to Chinese markets. Or look at Nigeria, Africa's largest economy. Its exports to China include crude oil, agricultural products, and increasingly textiles and furniture. Nigeria sees China not just as a customer, but as a partner for growth. With the zero tariff policy in place, Nigerian businesses could massively expand their exports if the government invests in industrial development. Even smaller nations like Kenya, Senegal, and Zambia are starting to diversify their exports to China, sending everything from tea and avocados to copper and floriculture. And here's what's most important. China doesn't tell these countries what to grow, what to export, or how to govern. That's why the partnership works. By contrast, Western aid often comes with lectures. China comes with contracts. Of course, critics in the West are already crying foul. They accuse China of debt-trap diplomacy and neo-colonialism. But let's be real, what exactly did centuries of Western colonialism leave behind? Looted resources, broken institutions, concentration camps, and a continent forced to develop under someone else's rules. China isn't perfect, but its approach is based on respect, mutual benefit, and practical outcomes. And right now, that's exactly what Africa needs. In fact, this zero-tariff decision could push the US and Europe to rethink their own strategies. If they want to remain relevant in Africa, they may need to finally treat African countries as equals, not as pawns in a global game. China's move is bold, strategic, and deeply symbolic. It marks a turning point in how Africa sees the world and how the world competes for Africa's future. For Africa, this is more than a trade deal. It's a moment to seize opportunity, scale up industry, and shape its own destiny. For China, it's a sign of global leadership based not on dominance, but partnership. And for the West, it's a wake-up call. If you enjoyed this video, then please like, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.